Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Total Saints podcast and the penultimate in our mini-series of World Cup TSP pods. We're once again live streaming this on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Twitch, so if you're watching along, please do post your questions and comments and I'll aim to read as many of them out as possible. My name is Ben Stanfield and joining me on this week's podcast are the owner of Saints Web, Steve Grant, the Athletic Southampton FC correspondent Jacob Tanswell and fellow sports journalist, Saints fan and TSP patron Nick Harris. Speaking of TSP patrons, again, we'd love to say a massive thank you to all our patrons who support this podcast. We appreciate it incredibly. On that note, please don't forget that at 7:30 p.m. UK time this coming Thursday, the 15th of December, we'll have our latest TSP VIP event. Open to all active patrons. Details on how to attend are in your private Patreon inbox. We're also delighted to have NordVPN sponsoring this week's episode. Are you currently out of the country and looking for a convenient way to rewatch one of those classic Christmas movies? Well, we may have the perfect solution. NordVPN keeps your data secure on public Wi-Fi, gives you access to the global internet, and even allows you to enjoy your favorite streaming websites from anywhere in the world. Yes, even the ones showing all those festive films. You can grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/Total Saints, where you'll get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus 4 months for free. Even better, it's all completely risk-free as Nord have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Further details, including that link just mentioned, can be found in the show notes for this podcast, as well as the YouTube description. Okay, a look ahead to this week's agenda. England head home from Qatar after suffering major tournament penalty heartache yet again. Messi outlasts Ronaldo. Croatia shocked Brazil. And Africa celebrates its first ever World Cup semi-finalists. And assuming my timekeeping is up to scratch, with only a couple of weeks until Christmas, we may even quiz our panel on what Saints boss Nathan Jones could be asking Santa for this year. Underpinned by our TSP Global patrons, this is our World Cup special, episode 3. Well, 24 hours on, the English dust has started to settle on yet another tournament exit as France pulled off a 2-1 quarter-final victory over Gareth Southgate's side, a game that mixed ongoing encouragement with all too familiar 12-yard failings. Steve, let's start with yourself, given you were there. We'll talk through some of the key talking points in a moment, but what did you think of the game and atmosphere overall? Give us a feel of things.
The atmosphere was odd. It didn't really feel like a World Cup quarter-final sort of for a lot of it. I mean, particularly first half, it was pretty subdued, and then kind of after half time, and particularly sort of back end of the first half, and then after half time when we started sort of cranking up the pressure a little bit more, everything kind of built up. But I think overall we were excellent. I thought you play that game 10 times, and I reckon 7 or 8 of those you probably win with that sort of performance. But the difference was, while earlier in the tournament against the weaker opposition, where we've been ultimately, the difference in those games was us being that much more clinical. The same applies here, in that France basically created 3 chances and scored 2 of them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, frustrating. And the one player you'd probably put your mortgage on in that England team to score a penalty, blazes one miles over the bar, and I mean, I assume that one's probably still rising, to be honest. It's I mean, it was extraordinary that given how confidently he put the first one away. I can only think that he's kind of sort of outthought himself when he's running up to take that, because I mean, think how many penalties he must have taken against Hugo Lloris over a number of years at Tottenham. And so Lloris knows exactly what his style is. He probably has a good idea of where he's going to put it, which was, I was quite surprised Lloris dived the wrong way for the first one. But then I think he's thought, well, okay, I hit that first one well, but just to make sure, I'm going to hit it even harder. And yeah, just got far too much on it. And I think that kind of relates to, I think, something Kieran Trippier said earlier in the tournament. I think after the Iran game, that the ball was from set pieces was kind of flying around a little bit more. And I do wonder whether, I think there's a sweet spot of how hard you have to hit the ball. If you hit it any harder, then you run the risk of it kind of flying all over the place, as Kane found to his cost, I think.
Yeah. Nick, lovely to have you along with us again. Thanks for joining us. looking back at the game, then were you pleased or surprised, or a bit of both, that Southgate decided to stay with the lineup and tactics that had finished the game against Senegal? Didn't automatically go back into maybe a more of a defensive mindset.
I'm pleased. I think it was the right thing to do, and I have to echo most of what Steve said about it being a good performance. I think it had worked very well after the sort of the tedium and boredom of the Nations League stuff, and everybody thinking that England were total garbage. Personally, I went into this World Cup thinking that England had as good a chance as anyone of winning this tournament, because the talent was there if applied properly. And I think Southgate, he's got lots of knockers, but he's a good bloke. I do think clearly there are some faults with his management in terms of particularly timing of substitutions that people could debate, but he is a good manager of men, and he's got the right things out of those players. And the players who play for him, talk about how well prepared they are, how confident they feel. So I'm glad that he went with the 4-3-3, stuck with what had worked. It had scored lots of goals, it had results. And it did work. England played well. It comes down, I know we've all heard this phrase so many times in the last 24 hours, fine margins. But, when you lose a goal on the break, to like the brilliant though it was from the French, and then you miss the second penalty, that's fine margins. England could have, could have got something out of that game. They didn't. I don't think it's a time for sort of saying, God, they screwed it up again. It just wasn't like that. I mean, I was in the unusual position. I was working last night on the game. The paper that I work for has Jesse Lingard as a columnist just for the World Cup. I've been working with him on his columns. I'll just give you a bit of a flavour of how it sort of went last night. The column, Jesse's actually in Athens. He was playing against Olympiacos, finished just before England kicked off, then watched the match, talked to him before the game, during the game, after the game, and he was just sending me WhatsApps as well.
Yeah.
And interesting talking to him, because, a lot of people maybe forget Jesse Lingard played 6 matches at the last World Cup. He's a World Cup semi-finalist. He scored a World Cup goal. There's only been 35, 36 players, England players, ever to play in a World Cup semi-final, and he's one of them, and about 50 have ever scored a World Cup goal. So it's interesting to get his perspective. But, we'll just go through what happened in that second half. Kane scores the first penalty, and he WhatsApp, get in. Then it's growing into the game now. Then it's think we can catch them on the counter. Then it's Saka, Kane and Foden, more confident now and growing into the game. Dominating this now, dominating it. A goal is coming. 3 minutes later, Giroud scores. It's out. Jesse texts me, FFS. And then the second penalty, I WhatsApp, OMG. He's going, watching now. Come on. That's it. I mean, it's kind of the roller coaster of the game from, the perspective of someone who's an England international himself, who is invested as any fan, who really wants England to do well. And again, I think he concluded in his column that, I'm gutted. I mean, later on, 2 hours later, he just sent me a message, just gutted it. So it said, like, hours after, it's obviously still on his mind that England have lost this football match. He so wanted them to win.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I'm gutted and I'm frustrated, but, I'm proud of what they did. And I pretty much share that sentiment.
Yeah. Just briefly, does his column now stop, or does he do it to the end of the World Cup?
No, he'll do one next Sunday, like a wrap up of the tournament. Probably, having had a week to think about it, he'll be able to say what England have and haven't learned, what happens next. Will Southgate still be in post? Will he have left? And obviously previewing the final between Croatia and Morocco.
And Jacob, nice to have you. I know you've mentioned just before we came on there, you've had a week off, so I'm sure refreshed and ready to go. But we were talking on the pod last week about the sort of sluggish start England made against Senegal that first 35 minutes, and I actually thought they started pretty well last night. They sort of were going toe to toe with French, but despite starting well, they then conceded, and there was obviously a lot of chat around the Saka foul down the other end, but a great shot and goal from Tchouameni. What did you make of those two incidents? Firstly, the foul, and then obviously the finish from him.
Yeah, I think you usually expect a foul in that position. I can see where the referee was as well. He might have thought Saka went down fairly easily, but I think it was a foul, and it was a great finish from Tchouameni. I think perhaps could have been a bit more pressure on the ball, but I was really pleased with how England responded. I thought, the 10 minutes after conceding the sometimes they lose their shape, they lose their structure. See Iceland as the example in 2016 after conceding the second one. But I thought their reaction was really good. And to answer Steve's point, I have got actually one of the World Cup balls, and I don't know if it's just my quality, but most of my shots go over the bar, so I do think there's an issue with the ball.
You keep running around the neighbours asking for the ball back.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But I just find international football just infuriating because of all these fine margins. You go back to Euro 2020, if Thomas Muller scored that 1-on-1, if Rashford's got penalty, when it off the post and into the net, we could be talking completely different. And it's just those fine margins all the time. And England did very well after the Tchouaméni's goal. Even after Giroud's goals, I thought they were okay. But it's just those fine margins. And everyone knows that Giroud loves running towards that front post. And it's twice now in 2 World Cups where Stones, I wouldn't say Walker, but mainly Stones, Maguire, they just are a yard off. And I thought they had really good tournaments, but that yard makes all the difference. And it just seems that those fine margins never fall England's way. And I think Gareth Southgate's done a phenomenal job. And I echo completely what Nick and Steve said, but I just feel with this current pool of talent, there's probably 2 tournaments now to maximise what they can, and you need a manager that's going to set on a formation, because I would have wished Southgate stay with that 4-3-3 throughout the Nations League and worked on it then, rather than just stumbling on it now. So I think Southgate's done a really good job, but perhaps time to move on.
Yeah, we've only been going 10 minutes and we've already come up with a name for this podcast, which is Fine Margins then. So this podcast episode, absolutely. Yeah. Steve, it feels very English, doesn't it, to be picking on sort of, fouls and things like that. But I know it was up the other end from you because, again, we were having a quick chat before the game. Just before half-time, there was a bit of a foul from Upper Meccano on Harry Kane, which, again, looking back at it, looked like it could have been given. Probably one of those ones where if the referee had given it, it wouldn't have got overturned. He didn't give it. It wasn't then necessarily overturned. And I know it was down the other end from you, but did you feel that was a penalty, or was it one of those 50-50s that sometimes you get, sometimes you don't?
I'd say it was definitely a foul. It looked absolutely clear cut that it was a foul, but the question is whether it was in the area. And I think from what I've not seen a huge amount. All I've seen is stills, and you can't. I'm always reluctant to judge anything based on a still image, because it just doesn't provide the full context. So you can't. It's difficult to tell whether the contact takes place kind of on the line or just outside. If it's on the line, then it should have been a penalty. The main question for me is how the ref didn't see it was a foul in the first place, because it just looked so blatant, even from where I was, like 110 yards away. I've got good eyes. I've got decent eyesight over sort of long distance, but even from there, it looked pretty clear cut to me. And there are a lot of sort of instances in the game where it just seemed that the referee's application of the laws was just wildly inconsistent. There was one where Saka was clearly hauled down by, I think, 3 French players, and then literally 5 seconds later, the French get the ball and run back, and Bellingham, I think it is, comes in with a challenge from the side, wins the ball, and the ref decides that's a foul. And it's just like, oh, come on, mate, which game are you actually watching here? Just utterly infuriated. And it's, basically you've had 50% of the quarterfinals been refereed by referees who just don't seem to have had any sort of grip on the game. That Argentina-Holland game on Friday night was absolutely extraordinary in the way that the Spanish fella Mateo Lejos managed that game. Messi should have been sent off, because he got away with basically punching the ball. Wasn't booked for that, which is mental. And then gets booked late in the game at the point where that free kick's given. So he shouldn't have been on the pitch for extra time. I think Gareth Southgate's right in what he said last night, that we don't want to be talking about referees all the time. But when they have such an impact on the game in that way, Saka got the crap kicked out of him all night, and he got no protection. I think he won one free kick and the penalty, and I think that was it. And I've seen people whinging about, oh, why did you take Saka off? Because he was limping for about 3 or 4 minutes before the substitution was made. There was no way he could have stayed on there, because he'd run his arse off, been brilliant, and yeah, he was causing the French so many problems. But the problem was he was then limping. So I mean, how much is that affecting his potential output? The only thing I'd have said was probably bring Rashford on instead of Sterling, because Sterling's obviously only had one training session all week. Has obviously had other issues going on, other issues in his mind, which is absolutely fine. No problem with him needing to deal with those. But you've got to take that context into consideration, and I think arguably that was possibly Southgate's only mistake.
Yeah. It's normally at this time, isn't it, where the one of the red tops sends the referee's address around everyone, or sends an Oompa Loompa band outside his house, don't they, for the next few weeks? But Nick, I mean, you still felt going into half time that England were very much in the game. You know, we started the second half really brightly. I think it was about 45 seconds when Bellingham had that brilliant shot that Lloris made a great save from. Obviously, the sort of kept the momentum going for a little bit, and then Tchouameni actually went from hero to villain, bringing down Saka for that penalty, which at least with that one, Kane dispatched it nicely, and it felt like just reward for that sort of 5-10 minutes before half time and 5-10 minutes after half time, didn't it?
Yeah, and by the time we got to that 70 minutes, when England really were dominating the game, and Jesse Lingard was predicting an imminent goal, but you know, England really did look like they were at it, and it did feel like there was going to be, you know, there were goals there. It was working. They clicked. I mean, there have been a few of the performances. Obviously, USA game was pretty turgid. Some of the first halves haven't been great, but by the second half, England have been into the groove and doing it. So absolutely. The first penalty, I mean, it was absolutely clinical. He just buried it, which made the second one more puzzling. I mean, only Harry Kane will know, you know, what he was thinking, but obviously there's enormous pressure. There's so much riding on it. I mean, God knows what, you know, how any of us would fare in that sort of situation where you know that basically, you know, you're level pegging and in the ascendancy, you know, that the game was there to be had. I know Kane posted today on Twitter that, you know, he was sorry and he takes responsibility because ultimately he messed up a penalty, and it's his job to score those things, and he messed it up, you know, by blazing it well over. But mistakes happen. It's just really unfortunate. But absolutely, England were still in it, I think, until the end of the match, because, you know, there was still only one goal in it at that point. And you could say they were unfortunate. I think for me, the opening French goal, it was clearly a foul on Saka. It just wasn't an obvious foul, and directly from that, you know, that's what led to the goal. You had 3 or 4 of the French players, including Mbappe and Dembele, in the run-up. It's a fantastic strike. It's 20 yards. It's flying at 100 kilometers an hour or whatever. I mean, could Pickford have done a bit better? Maybe, probably not. It was a great strike, but that came directly from that incident. If it had been called a foul, which it clearly was a foul, the replays are absolutely clear. I don't know what was going on there, but without that, you know, play continuing, that goal doesn't happen. I mean, again, fine margins.
Yeah, as Saints fans, which we all are, I think we all sat there thinking, "Oh, that happens to Saints week in, week out, doesn't it? It should be fouled down the other end, and then we let one in." But obviously we touched on it, Jacob. There, the second goal as well. I think it was Glenn that was saying on the pod last week. You know, with all due respect to Olivier Giroud, who's now obviously the leading French goal scorer, not the best striker in the world, but he thrives on service, like he got from Antoine Griezmann. You know, fantastic cross in. Obviously, it was a disappointing time for England to let the goal in, but you know, that's a very sort of typical Giroud finish.
Exactly, and I think moments like them win the World Cup. France, I didn't think were very good at all. I thought that they were, you know, they were sporadic in their quality. I thought Mbappe was fairly quiet. I think
we did well with him, didn't we?
Yeah, there's one foot race between Mbappe and Walker, and I really like that. But I think Mbappe crossed it and Rice just swept up, who I thought was really good. Yeah. But it's just those moments that produce the quality. I think Griezmann was fairly quiet by his standards in previous games in this tournament, but he still produced that cross or that pass, and it's the same with Giroud. And well, that's what makes it probably, you know, even more galling, because against Italy, I thought Italy deserved it really on the balance of play. They ground England down. Their midfield was superior. Same with Croatia, with Henderson, Lingard, and Dele Alli in midfield. You know, getting ran and switched to side. But this time I just thought England were better overall. And it's just those moments that define international games and define World Cups, and are the difference between us throwing pints in the air or going home crying and getting in our car sobbing. And that's what happened last night, unfortunately.
Yeah, Sengen Tully one says 2 bits of quality French magic beat us. I think it's not, certainly would agree with that. Steve, look, obviously we touched on the second penalty a little bit. I mean, I think, when all of us saw it happen, it looked like a penalty. Clearly, every single England player on the pitch thought it was a penalty. When you watched it back on the replay, you thought there's no chance that this is going to be anything than a VAR monitor and a penalty. Thankfully, it was given. Obviously, Harry Kane, you could see, I mean, certainly we could on TV coverage, maybe you couldn't, Steve, the pressure that he was obviously under. You could see that he was trying to concentrate and keep himself calm. It reminded me a little bit of Harry Kane in front of the Northern 2016, the way it sort of ballooned over the bar. Obviously, the penalty spot wasn't quite the same, but do you just put that down, even with someone like him who is a proven, experienced footballer? That's purely pressure, or do you put it down to anything else?
Yeah,
apart from
pressure.
The balls.
Yeah, I mean it's partly pressure, and I always think. I mean, I've got no stats to back this up, but just it kind of instinctively feels that if you're given 2 penalties in a game, there must be a much higher percentage chance of you missing that second one. Because the question is always in your mind, well, okay, do I do what worked the first time and run the risk that the keeper kind of decides, right, okay, well, that's where they went, so I'm going to go the same again, or do you change? And I mean, the one thing that coaches always tell you when you're practicing penalties or when you're sort of discussing techniques for penalties, pick what you're going to do and stick with it. Don't change your mind.
Yep.
And I wonder whether Kane has possibly changed his mind a little bit, even just in those few steps as he's running up. Right, okay, I'm gonna put a bit more pace on this because I think Lloris is gonna dive the right way this time. And unfortunately, yeah, he's put a bit too much on it. On the end of the day, if he put slightly less on it and it ends up in the top corner, similar to the one that Harry Maguire stuck away in that shootout in the final last year, then I mean we're sat here having a completely different conversation. I mean, I might have been nursing an absolutely stinking hangover for a start.
There might have only been 3 of us, but yeah. Jacob, as often happens when you're losing a game, the sort of final few minutes and even in the injury time seem to go pretty quickly. Obviously, Marcus Rashford had that free kick right at the end that we were all willing to go in, a bit like the effort against Wales. It felt to me, almost as a Saints fan again, that pivotal last few moments of the World Cup, all I was thinking was James Ward-Prowse territory.
It was James Ward-Prowse territory, and I know a few people said, "Oh, he hasn't scored a free kick this season," but I would like to see an example where he's had the opportunity from that position. And I think that's one of the reasons why you bring Ward-Prowse. I'm not sure many managers go along with that school of thought, really thinking just bring the player on for a free kick. And bearing on, if he does score, he's going to be playing the next half an hour as well of extra time. So I think everyone was just praying that went in, but I think it was a little bit too close, really, for Rashford's style or free kick. I think the Wales one was a little bit further out, wasn't it, which suited him. But I think I'm sure
poor goalkeeper.
I'm sure Ward-Prowse was watching it with Woody Caballero, obviously running around ring, celebrating the night before, and wishing he was over in Qatar.
Yeah, I obviously remember him scoring that one against Spurs against Lloris, and I seem to remember in England hockey a long time ago they used to have a player called Callum Giles that they used to just bring on for short corners. It was like the sort of on and off. But there you go. But look, Nick, obviously that was that in the end. It's France that go through to play Morocco in the semi-finals. We'll have a chat about Morocco a bit later on. Look, there's been a lot of chat afterwards, Nick, about this being a missed opportunity for England, the amount of teams that have gone out, the way we were playing, the fact, with all due respect, it was going to be Morocco in the semi-finals. Does it feel like a missed opportunity to you?
Yeah, but I'd say that the last World Cup was a missed opportunity against Croatia.
And
the final of the Euros was a missed opportunity against Italy. This one is obviously a missed opportunity because you've got a group of really brilliantly talented players, squad depth, working for a coach they believe in, who has showed that he's got a plan this time, and genuinely, they could have won last night, and therefore I'm with Steve. I think the winner of that game probably becomes the favourite to win the tournament. Although it's been such a crazy tournament, I honestly think that anything could still happen. But the last 3 tournaments have been missed opportunities. That is kind of obvious. These things don't come around so often. It's a missed opportunity. But this one, I try to be a half glass full type person and looking at the positives, which is, England played well at this tournament throughout the tournament. And they lost a game against a team that are the current world champions and who are absolutely brilliant, despite having some fairly significant players missing at this tournament. Of course, no Kante, no Pogba. There's 6 or 7 regular starters are not in the squad, and they're still brilliant as a collective unit. So to lose to France, there's no shame in that. But is it a missed opportunity? Of course it is. And you know, who knows what the squad or the manager is going to look like in 2026 in America and Mexico and Canada. But absolutely a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and Jacob, look, I mean, again, you know, I think I sit here genuinely as disappointed as everyone else, but some might say, more critical cynics maybe, that England have played 2 decent sides in this World Cup. They've played USA, who they threatened, rarely threatened. They've played France, who they've lost to. But how would you assess the World Cup as a overall performance from England?
Yeah, I think that's the same critique as the previous 2 tournaments, really. I think you see the Croatia, that's really the first team that England ran into that could cause problems, and it was the same. I think if this was how England performed 2 tournaments ago, I'd be quite encouraged, quite emboldened by it. But it's just England just keep falling short against these top teams, really. And I think this was the opportunity for England to win it. When I looked on paper at the start of the tournament of all the other teams, none of them really looked like they were in their peak. You know, Spain, I think they had a really good game plan, which is quite one-dimensional, but they didn't have a striker. Belgium had passed it. France missing players through injury. It just seems to me that this was all geared for England to go and win this, because Southgate has had 6 years now in charge. He's built the team. The players know each other. They've got understanding. So I was expecting to go deep, and the fact that it kind of frazzled out in a way everyone expected, really, in terms of quarterfinals against France, is disappointing. And as well as England have played, and I think they played really well, arguably their best performance under Gareth Southgate last night. It just seems like this keeps happening, and it's one too often for me. So it's good, but I think there needs to be big improvements. But I wouldn't, throw the baby out with the bathwater for sure.
Yeah. Steve, final word to you on this then. You followed England here, there and everywhere for the last X amount of years. Do you think it's a campaign that should be remembered positively? And I think I probably know your answer to this based on the podcast from a couple of weeks ago, but Gareth Southgate still very much the man to lead them over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a positive campaign. I think, as I said 2 weeks ago, everyone massively overreacted to that USA game. It was just one of those games we didn't quite nail it, but at the end of the day, they didn't, other than like a couple of half decent chances in the first half, they didn't open us up, and we shut the game down by bringing Henderson on. Naturally, I mean, I've been a huge critic of Jordan Henderson's in an England shirt, because like up until probably a couple of years ago, probably that Ukraine game actually in the Euros, he'd not really put in a performance for England. For me, he'd kind of just been there as a passenger and not really done an awful lot. But since coming on in that USA game, he basically he turned that game, shut the midfield down, so the US weren't able to run through us anymore. And then obviously Wales, Senegal, and last night he was excellent.
Yeah,
a lot of energy. He was basically doing the Mason Mount role, coupled with the leadership qualities that he's obviously got. He's obviously been there and done it at club level, but international level, he's looked up to by the younger players alongside him. So it's always helpful. So yeah, I think it's been a positive tournament. Unfortunately, for once on this occasion, the draw has kind of worked against us, really, in that we've come up against the best team so early.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously in Russia, everything kind of panned out really well. I can't remember who it was that didn't top their group, which meant that we suddenly had a very favourable path. But yeah, getting France in the quarters rather than much deeper in the tournament is unfortunate. But it's, I mean, as ever, it's the luck of the draw, and it's essentially a 1 in 8 chance that happens in a 32 team tournament. That you come up against that particular group's winner. So yeah, I mean, it's been a good tournament. We've played well. Southgate has clearly shown that he's learning tactically. The way that we've progressed from Russia, where we obviously very obviously had no plan B beyond the initial strategy. When that failed to work, or when the players started tiring and the opposition changed their system, we didn't know how to react. In the Euros, we managed to go one step further. I actually think we were absolutely fine for the vast majority of that final against Italy. Italy had two shots, and their goal came from a lucky ricochet off the post, which on another day that hits the back of Pickford's head and goes out for a corner. So I think people criticising Southgate for that Italy one, I think not overly keen on that. But yeah, he's learned, and like I say, this tournament where we've had this 4-3-3 system that I think people probably thought that we only went for that against Iran because it was Iran. And it's like, well, okay, we could throw all the attacking players on here, because we know that Iran are going to be very defensive. They're going to try and be very compact and deny us space. So okay, we're just going to put more and more attacking players on and hope that pays dividends. And obviously, it clearly did. But then he stuck to his guns and stuck with that formula the whole way through, and it worked against all manner of opposition. And I mean, let's be honest, you've got to say it worked against France. It's just not been reflected in the final result, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, for me, Southgate stays. I mean, the FA definitely aren't gonna sack him.
No,
absolutely no chance of that. But it's going to be his decision, and it will be basically, does he feel that he's got the energy for it again? I guess.
Yeah.
But with a relatively short turnaround, because of course we've only got 18 months till the Euros in Germany. Actually, it's a relatively short turnaround. Maybe you take him through to the end of his contract in 2024, and then look at a change, because I don't really see. I mean, certainly if the FA are looking to kind of capitalise on all the investment at St George's Park with all the coaching pathways and the development pathways and things like this. I mean, Southgate has obviously been heavily involved in all of that, having been sort of in charge of development before he then got the under-21s job, and then before he stepped up to take over from Pint of Wine Sam Allardyce. He's been involved in all of this, and it's all kind of an FA process where they want the England manager and the managers at all the different age groups to have kind of gone through all the same pathway, so that you've got a natural feed of players and coaches from the age groups going up, progressing through into the senior teams. I think realistically, they're going to want to appoint somebody who sits into that pathway to an extent. I mean, not necessarily Lee Carsley, who's obviously the under-21 manager now, but perhaps looking for someone like, I don't know, I mean, I guess the obvious option is Steve Cooper, who was the under-17s manager who won the World Cup a few years back. But realistically, at the moment, there's nobody available who fits that mantra. I mean, I've seen like people heavily linking Thomas Tuchel and Mauricio Pochettino with the job, but these are coaches who want to spend weeks and weeks and weeks practicing the finite details with players on the training ground. You don't get that with international football, and that is why international football is so pragmatic. It's so the detail with international football is all about controlling the game, and that's why England have got good under Gareth Southgate, because we have learnt to control games. We've learnt that actually we don't need to go gung-ho. Gung-ho is the way that you end up getting picked off, and that was the mistakes we always made. It was always glorious failure because we'd be attack-minded, but then we'd just be really naive and get done by anybody half decent. Whereas here we've been good. We've been pragmatic, and we've had a proper plan. We've been tactically on the money, and we've controlled the bits that we can control. You can't legislate for missing a penalty from the guy that you would absolutely put your mortgage on. So that's where we are, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. Well, let's touch on the semi-finals then, just briefly. First up, Argentina ranked 3rd in the world against Croatia ranked 12th in the world. Nick, I'm going to ask you about Sofian Boufal in a minute, so you can have your moment to talk about him instead. So Jacob, let's come to you on this one. Obviously, Messi versus Modric looks quite a tasty battle. Certainly, both of their semi-finals. Argentina-Netherlands was a proper classic, which I think we all enjoyed. A bit of everything going on, balls in the dugouts, and yellow cards here, there, and everywhere. And of course, Croatia knocking out Brazil, which was a bit of a shock, but they are absolutely a very dogged side. You just know with Croatia they are not going to roll over easily, so it could be a really interesting tussle. This
it's going to be interesting, but God, it's going to be attritional, isn't it? Oh my word! It's going to be Croatia's midfield three trying to keep hold of the ball because they haven't got the legs. Then you've got Argentina's team who are all legs, and I don't think they've got that much quality in midfield. I think Rodrigo de Paul runs twice as much as Messi, but he's not very good
crazy
on the ball.
Yeah, it's just, his energy is amazing.
Messi walks though, doesn't he?
Yeah, but everyone knows that. But I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a grind. I think it's going to go into extra time. I think that could be a pretty much a banker, really. But I'm really impressed by Croatia because I watched their first game against Morocco, I think it was, and I thought this team. I thought they're going to fall like Belgium. I thought
that was 0-0, wasn't it? It feels like ages ago.
Yeah,
no, I think there's one shot on target. I thought this team are too old now. They look like they're past the sell-by date. They need some new blood in there, and they just managed to grind out, don't they? I think Dejan Lovren's been unbelievable, to be honest with you.
Well, we're not going to agree with that on this podcast.
I don't think I've seen him like that since his first 6 months at St Mary's. But they're a good side. But I think Argentina, Steve alluded to what the hallmarks of what makes a good international team, and I think Argentina have got that, but they just got a bit more aggression and a bit more know-how, and they're not naive like England are. I think you see the first point, and so just to go back to England's point, the Saka foul in the build-up was the only time in that half Kyle Walker actually overlapped, and look what happened on the counter. So, but yeah, I think Argentina have just got that grit and something about them that I think will override Croatia's lack of legs, but ball dominance, really.
Yeah, no,
two very emotional teams as well.
Yeah, I don't know how much emotion Argentina have got left in them because every game they seem to be.
I'm sure they'll find some.
Yeah.
It must be absolutely exhausting supporting them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they literally, if they'd lost to Mexico, they would have gone home, wouldn't they? And now, obviously, here they are, and it's just, I mean, they are one of those teams, as you say. I mean, they're obviously being well backed out there. There's lots of Argentinian fans, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And then, of course, the second semi that none of us will be paying any attention to now, Nick, really will. We'll all be doing other things on Wednesday now. But of course, France ranked 4th against Morocco, who ranked 22nd, as we said right at the outset. The first African team to make World Cup semi-finals. So, credit to them. And I think if we're all brutally honest, as I said there, we're going to be rooting for them and Sofian Boufal now, aren't we?
I think so. I think just the sort of the way they play, it's quite exciting to watch going forward. Their defensiveness, the defense is solid. I think in 9 games now, they've conceded 1 goal, and that was an own goal against Canada. So they haven't had an opponent score against them for 9 games, including 5 in this tournament. Boufal, obviously, we had him at Saints. He scored a nice goal. Similar style to Chris Marsden's famous dribble down the wing.
I was at that game, Portman Road,
against Ipswich, except in real speed, not in walking football like Chris's goal
didn't scuff it over the line with his wrong foot. Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw the clips of Sofian Boufal with his mum yesterday.
Brilliant.
That kind of joyfulness that they brought. That this sort of. I think they are. They're groundbreaking. This first team from the continent of Africa in a World Cup semi-final. You saw the pictures from the Djenar El Fanar in Marrakesh. Tens of thousands of people just exploding with joy. The scenes of people in London and New York around the world, the Moroccan diaspora. It's kind of, I think it was, we all enjoy an underdog, and they've proved themselves to be, who would have thought at the start of the tournament that 2 teams from the same group, Croatia and Morocco, would end up as 2 semi-finalists to potentially meet in the final. It's bonkers. But have they got a chance against France? I think in this World Cup, absolutely they do. I mean, France have been at times scintillating, but they also have had off days where they haven't been scintillating. If Morocco don't concede a goal,
well, all the pressure's on France, isn't it? Exactly, there's no pressure on Morocco.
Exactly, there's no pressure on Morocco. They've got freedom. They've got this far. They haven't got this far by accident. I'm assuming France will be the strong bookmakers' favourites, but I backed Morocco to beat Portugal, for example, because I just thought, the defensive solidity, although it gets a bit helter-skelter, they haven't conceded, and it is going to take something special to beat them. So, yeah, you'd expect France to win, but I would not be surprised if Morocco found a way. And in the other semi-final, like Jacob was saying, it is guy. Messi, as we know, the guy's a genius. He produces amazing things, but the longer we go on with Messi, it's weird, but he can leave me cold sometimes, despite him doing these amazing things. He just doesn't have that, that I don't know. He's like he's a bit dead behind the eyes. He's a brilliant footballer, of course he is, but he hasn't got that dynamism. For example, when Maradona dragged an Argentina team single-handedly to World Cup, and the narrative is Messi, can Messi drag him? He's not doing it in the same way. He's producing moments of magic. But Croatia, again, this whole another extraordinary tale. How the hell did Croatia get to this semi-final? Everyone's been talking about them looking tired since the first 10 minutes of the opening match. Heard someone else, a great line. It was like, when you've got the Croatians down, you don't need to just stamp on their necks. You need to get in the car and reverse over them to make sure they will not come back and do you, because they're never.
Yeah. Well, Croatia were tired from the first game in 2018, weren't they? And then they went through all the extra time and penalties and everything there. It's just like,
and now
we don't learn.
And they've got half a team who actually qualify for their football pensions already. I mean, you collect your pension at 35. So it's extraordinary. I wouldn't bet against any combination of finalists. I really wouldn't. And if Morocco do it, I think I'm pleased for Morocco. I'm pleased for the Arab world. I never had a problem with the World Cup being in an Arab nation or anything like that. My opposition to Qatar was based on other things to do with the vote and all the things that we've rehearsed. But I mean, I think a World Cup, I've been to Morocco a few times. It is a properly football mad country. It's only been professional football there since '96. They've come on leaps and bounds. That would be a bonkers World Cup, staging a World Cup in Morocco. And I think that's good for Africa, good for the Arab world, and good for football that Morocco have got this far. And I'd love to see them do well. It would be extraordinary.
Yeah, indeed. As you say, for all the wrong reasons for the World Cup, Morocco, absolutely the reason that, we all love these sort of tournaments. So good stuff. All right, well, to finish up then, let's spend 5 minutes or so having a quick chat about Saints. Thankfully, my timekeeping's just about on track, although Alex will probably tell me off. But firstly, an update on today's action. The Saints women's team, unfortunately, losing 2-0 in the FA Cup versus Championship rivals Bristol City. A shame, but still plenty to play for this season. Secondly, as I mentioned in the introduction, Steve, at time of recording, it's exactly 2 weeks until Christmas now. Nathan Jones may be 49 years old, but I bet, like the rest of us, he still writes to Santa. Assuming he does, what do you think is going to be top of his Saints list for this year? A new striker in the January window or something else, Steve?
It's got to be a goal scorer, hasn't it? I mean, you can realistically improve the defensive unit. I think there's enough raw material to work with, but at the end of the day, you're not necessarily going to get by with 0-0s. So yeah, I think getting someone who can take the chances that we create, because I mean, as I've said before, we create plenty of chances, we just miss them.
Yeah.
I mean, like those two big defeats, Newcastle and Liverpool, we won those games on XG. The chance we created, and we've lost 7-2 on aggregate. It's ridiculous. So yeah, final third productivity has got to be on Nathan, sort of first item on the whiteboard to tick off, I think.
Yeah, Nick, if you're Nathan Jones coming into a brand new team, but you're languishing in the relegation zone, is it a striker for you, or is there something more shiny than that?
No, it's got to be a striker. I mean, he'll obviously go back to the list they had in the summer: Cody Gakpo and Ramos.
200 million. Here you
go. Easy deals to do now.
Can we just get these two across the line?
Probably get both of them. Yeah.
They were available for what, 12 or 13 million euros in the summer, and that's gone up tenfold. So.
Although the Portuguese lad was terrible yesterday, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. But
that's probably brought his price down again. That's good.
Having scored a hat trick, But do they want to? They're going to have Champions League clubs after them now. Are they want to go into a relegation battle? Of course not. So you just have to trust that the scouting system is there. It's got to be a striker for all the reasons Steve said. We're not having problems creating chances. We're having problems scoring goals. I mean, if we had got a striker in the summer, we might have been looking at a completely different season. Instead, we're 10 days away from a Carabao Cup match. that looks that's got banana skin written all over it. And then we're
Don't say
playing,
that.
and then we're playing. No, I don't expect. Of course, I expect us to beat Lincoln. But then we're
That's
playing.
my next question, to build it up with Jacobs around Lincoln City. Come on, build it up, Nick. Come on.
Well, yeah, right. Of course I don't. But then I think the next Premier League match, isn't it Brighton?
Yeah, Boxing Day.
Right,
Yeah.
Brighton have got about 20 players who've been brilliant at this World Cup. And like, it's just not. It's not going to be easy. So we need to, and that's before the end of the year, before the window's open. We've got 6 or 7 games now against teams that, if we're not winning those games, then we are properly going to be in a relegation battle. And that's just not somewhere we want to be. So yeah, it's goals. It's a striker. That's it. I mean, I think we know we're the youngest team in the division by average age, average starting lineup. We started one lineup. One of the lineups earlier this season was the youngest Premier League starting 11 since Fergie went with a bunch of teenagers about 6 years ago. It was like 23 or 24 or something. So we know how promising some of these players are, and we talked and listened about on this podcast about the pitfalls of going for that youth. But yeah, when it comes down to it, it's goals. We need someone who's going to create, convert the chances. Absolutely.
You can take the football away from Saints fans, but you can't take Saints fans away from the football, can you? So there we go. Anyway, Jacob, it's only 10 days until Saints play Lincoln City in the Carabao Cup now. Are you excited about the imminent return of football to the South Coast? Because Nick is.
I am, and Nick's got me worried now, because I'm thinking I'm taking this as a safe passage into the next round. But I think obviously a striker is really important, but for me, I wouldn't mind just seeing a number 10 or a winger that's got 1v1 skill that is a little bit different. Because
you're lucky Glenn's not on, Jacob.
Yeah, because I look at all the Slam's attackers and all identical. I think there's nothing that can create out of nothing. Maybe a doozy, but he's raw. I wouldn't mind seeing a winger, and I think Slamson are looking at a winger and a striker. Hopefully, that's the best case scenario. So ideally, something just to get me out of my seat, maybe like a Sofian Buffal type, maybe. But yeah, Lincoln, I'm banking on that to be a nice, joyous piece afterwards. To be honest with you.
Good. All right, excellent. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Don't forget that you can follow Total Saints Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. It's just at Total Saints Pod. There's also our website, totalsaints.co.uk. We're also on Patreon, where you can support the podcast with a monthly contribution if you'd like to. Just visit patreon.com/Total Saints Podcast. We have 4 tiers, ranging from £5 to £20 per month. Each comes with their own perks, including weekly shout-outs for those patrons in our Francis Benali and Mick Shannon tiers. So a big thank you to Dave Melton, Mark Atkins and Matt Hall in the Francis Benali tier, and also to Colt Baker, Ed Busy, Dave Ernsberger, Nick Hinkston, Phil Cook, Matt Rose and Nick Reed in our Mick Shannon tier. My thanks to Nick, Jacob and Steve for their time and views this evening. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. We'll be back next Monday, the 19th, with reflections on the World Cup final and a look ahead to Saints versus Lincoln City as the emotion, which has already started on the pod tonight, of club football returns. Until then, thank you for listening. Catch you all soon.